As someone who's been obsessed with Frankenstein for as long as I can remember, Guillermo del Toro's new adaptation was easily my most anticipated movie of the year, and I'm thrilled to say that it absolutely lived up to my expectations. Through his cinematography, Del Toro captures the soul of Mary Shelley's novel, even if he takes some creative liberties with the story itself to add his own narrative flair. What makes it even more special is the manner in which he honors the long, rich history of the iconic Frankenstein films that came before. As someone who's watched every version I could get my hands on, I simply couldn't help but smile at all the clever nods to the classics, even those from the Universal and Hammer eras. You could see Del Toro's love for those films deeply in the details he hid in his own adaptation, and his signature neo-gothic style makes this adaptation feel like the perfect blend of old and new, which in my opinion is a match made in cinematic heaven. Not just that, Del Toro also snuck in clever motifs, Easter eggs, and recreated a few iconic paintings in some really cool scenes within the film. But unless you rewatch it with the intention of unearthing more than just the plot, your eyes may skip them. And that's where we come in. So without wasting another moment, let's discuss every hidden detail that you probably missed in Del Toro's Frankenstein. But before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. The fleeting mention of Krempe. So during Victor's demonstration before the Royal College of Medicine Disciplinary Tribunal in Edinburgh, he names one of his rivals as Dr. Krempe, after judges call his prototype of the creature an unholy abomination. Now, if you've read the original 1818 Mary Shelley novel, you might know that this was a nod to the Krempe who appears briefly in the novel as a professor of natural philosophy at Ingolstadt University as Victor's mentor. He initially dismissed Victor's fascination with alchemy as wasted time on outdated studies and asked him to focus on the science that has been proven, which prompted Victor to feel rebellious and turn to the more progressive and even radical chemistry taught by Professor Waldman. Krempe was also one of the first professors to be overridden by Victor's ambition in the novel. While his role in the novel was forgetfully brief, the character was actually expanded greatly for The Curse of Frankenstein, where Victor had a Swiss assistant named Dr. Paul Krempe, played by Robert Urquhart. In this version, he was a colleague and former tutor to Victor Frankenstein, and initially works with Victor on experiments that includes reanimating a dead dog. However, eventually he becomes deeply disturbed by Victor's ambition to create a human being from corpse parts and attempts to stop him, thus creating a moral conflict between the two. The whole character parallels of Heinrich Harlander with Pretorius and Bernstein. So one of the most striking connections in Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein is between Heinrich Harlander, who is played by Christopher Waltz, and Ernest Thesiger's Dr. Pretorius from Bride of Frankenstein, which was released back in 1935. In fact, when Waltz was first cast back in 2023, some reports even claimed that he would be playing Dr. Septimus Pretorius himself. While the name eventually changed in the years between this announcement and the film's release, it's clear that some vital parts of Pretorius's character carried through into the final version of Harlander. Like Pretorius, Harlander also tempts Frankenstein into a kind of Faustian deal, which ultimately turns into blackmail. There's another clever nod too, because Harlander's death mirrors that of Paul Hardsmith's Professor Bernstein from The Curse of Frankenstein, released in 1957, whose brain was also fatally damaged after a fall. But the character wanting Victor to create a solution for him to cure his syphilis and give him a new body is only true to Del Toro's depiction of Heinrich Harlander. The Watchtower Laboratory reference. So in the novel, Victor built his creation in his modest apartment in Ingolstadt, near the university. This was also true of the first screen adaptation of Frankenstein in 1910, which mostly takes place in small spaces. But all that changed in 1931 with James Whale's vision of Frankenstein, which placed the doctor's laboratory in an abandoned watchtower. This aesthetic was also adapted by Del Toro and his team with their own distinctive style as they modified and abandoned Castle in Victor's vision, but this was clearly inspired by the classic film. It's even set precariously on the edge of a cliff in a delicious nod to the classic Universal monster movies. Plus, there's the fact that Jacob Elordi's creature is given life with a lightning strike rather than the mysterious and ambiguous method documented in the novel, which to me strikes as a tip of the hat to James Whale and the wizard behind the sparkling electric machines of his two Frankenstein films, Kenneth Strickfaden. The windmills in Del Toro's Frankenstein is a nod to the climax of the classic 1931 film. In the recent film, we see Oscar Isaac's Victor gathering bodies from a battlefield for his creation, and while he's marking each dead man, a number of burned-out windmills can be seen in the background that bear a striking resemblance to the one found in the climax of the 1931 film. Here, the creator's name is Henry Frankenstein, who was knocked unconscious by the monster in the film and then carried to an old windmill. Before this, the monster had killed a farmer's daughter, so when the peasants heard the creature and saw it climbing to the top of the windmill while dragging Henry with it, the monster hurled the scientist to the ground. Luckily, Henry's fall here was broken by the wooden blades of the windmill, thus saving his life. Some of the villagers then bring him home while the rest of the mob set the windmill ablaze, with the monster trapped inside. The 1931 film ends at Castle Frankenstein, with Henry's father celebrating the wedding of his recovered son with a toast to a future grandchild. The slight nod to 1974's Young Frankenstein. Frankenstein is, for the most part, a serious film, but there's one line that genuinely made me laugh out loud. When Victor says how the scale will make the work easier for him, it felt like a sly little wink to Young Frankenstein, which was released in 1974. The creature is almost always portrayed as massive, but this line reminded me so much of Gene Wilder's Dr. Frederick Frankenstein, reading from his grandfather's notes and deciding that making the creature gigantic would just simplify everything for him. Then comes that unforgettable exchange where Inga points out that all of the creature's proportions would have to be increased before pausing and adding how he would have an enormous Schwanzstücker, to which Frederick, without missing a beat, replies how it goes without saying. Now, I can't say for sure that Del Toro meant Victor's line was a direct nod to Young Frankenstein, but it was such a perfect little echo that I can't help but think it was. The costume of the creature. So in Del Toro's Frankenstein, when the creature first comes to life, we see him dressed mostly in bandages. And mind you, this is definitely not an unusual scene because this look has shown up plenty of times before, from The Curse of Frankenstein to 1975's The Rocky Horror Picture Show. But in this film, the design feels almost like a direct homage to David Prowse's version of the monster in the underrated 1970 Hammer film The Horror of Frankenstein. That movie stands out in the Hammer lineup for a few reasons, with the first being that it stars Ralph Bates instead of Peter Cushing as the Baron. Secondly, it's directed by Jimmy Sangster rather than Terence Fisher. And lastly, it leans more toward dark comedy than traditional horror. Still, the monster's appearance is unforgettable, as you can see that Prowse's powerful build is front and center, wrapped in those iconic bandages. Later, when the creature in Del Toro's film adds a cloak to his outfit, the resemblance to Christopher Lee's long green coat in The Curse of Frankenstein becomes unmistakable. So that was definitely a clever visual bridge between several eras of Frankenstein cinema made by a true fan of the creature. The reference of the maple leaf and the floating daisies. I think one of the best scenes in the 1931 Frankenstein has always been the moment by the lake between Boris Karloff's creature and the little girl Maria, played by Marilyn Harris. It was such a hauntingly beautiful exchange because Maria, who was completely unafraid, invited the creature to sit beside her and toss daisies into the water in order to watch them float. Similarly, in Del Toro's version, there's a wonderful echo of that moment. Here, the creature is chained in a dungeon-like chamber where rainwater flows through gutters and drains out of the watchtower. There, we see him notice how the maple leaves float along the surface, drifting away just like Mary's daisies once did. In a tender reversal of the original scene, the creature gives one of the leaves to Mia Goth's Elizabeth during their first encounter, who, like Maria, approaches him gently and without fear. Later in the film, after Victor shoots the creature and wounds Elizabeth in the process, we see the being lifting Elizabeth in his arms and carry her to a large rock, which in a way visually recalls the scene in Bride of Frankenstein, when Karloff's creature rescues a shepherdess from drowning and lays her on a similar outcropping. It was honestly such a beautiful, layered tribute that tied the legacy of the 1931 Frankenstein with Del Toro's own emotional touch. There are too many references of Boris Karloff's creature. Another quiet homage that Del Toro's 2025 version of Frankenstein pays to the initially wholesome bond between the creature and Maria comes when, during the search for the creature, the camera lingers on a small cottage where a little girl named Anna Maria is picking white flowers with her grandfather. It's a brief but beautiful moment that echoes the innocence of the original 1931 adaptation and reminds us of who the creature was before fear and cruelty turned the world against him, because at the end of the day, he's just a naive being who only wanted connection and kindness. Unfortunately, the 1931 scene ended on a devastating note because after they run out of flowers to throw into the water, the creature misunderstands the game and throws Maria into the water, expecting her to float back up just like the daisies did. But after Maria accidentally drowns, the creature becomes terrified and distraught when he realizes she is not floating, and so he runs away from the scene. The sequence of the creature escaping the tower is a nod to the iconic windmill fire scene from the 1935 sequel. In Del Toro's film, as the creature hangs chained in his dungeon, Victor begins dousing the entire tower with kerosene, going through can after can, before finally setting it on fire. Trapped and surrounded by flames, the creature manages to break free of his restraints and escape through the tower's gutter system right before the flames close in on him. This moment feels like a clear nod to Bride of Frankenstein, because at the start of that film, the creature also survives the fiery destruction of the windmill blaze. As the flames died down, the angry mob started leaving, except for Hans, who was the grieving father of the little girl Maria. He stayed behind to make sure the monster was truly dead, but unfortunately, when he falls through the charred ruins into the water below, the monster rises from the depths, making his unforgettable entrance. So in both versions, the creature's escape from fire comes through water, which symbolizes his rebirth from destruction, in the most Frankenstein way possible. Del Toro's creature being shot in the eye is also seen in The Curse of Frankenstein. So one of the most memorable moments that shows up in almost every Frankenstein adaptation is the encounter between the creature and the blind man, who is sometimes portrayed as living alone and sometimes with his family. In Del Toro's version, we get a beautiful mix of both, starting with the quiet joy of the creature secretly watching the family's warmth, and the tenderness of his direct bond with the blind man himself, who becomes the creature's first friend in an unforgiving world. However, as always, this moment of peace does not last. As the old man dies, this sad scene ends in more tragedy when the creature crosses paths with a family of hunters who come back to find their father dead and retaliates by shooting the creature just above the eye. The way we see him raise his hand to his face in pain mirrors a striking moment from The Curse of Frankenstein, where the creature is shot directly in the eye and blood slowly trickles between his fingers. Cool, right? Elizabeth's wedding dress makes her the Bride of Frankenstein. Elizabeth's final look is definitely one of the most talked about aspects of the film. Given that it was on her wedding night, she wore a white dress with white satin ribbons wrapped around her arms to resemble surgical bandages. That was indeed a deliberate choice because it not only pays homage to both Elizabeth's fate, but is a nod to the creatures and his band-aids that he wore when he was first born. This white dress also featured multiple layers of fabric that captured the light in an interesting way, which was a design element thought through by both the costume designer and director because Guillermo wanted Elizabeth to be very ethereal, and so there is an iridescence and ephemeral nature to some of those colors, which the fabrics helped in portraying. portraying. But if you're a Frankenstein purist, you must already know that Mia Goth's wedding dress in Del Toro's Frankenstein feels like a clear nod to Elsa Lanchester's iconic look in Bride of Frankenstein. I mean, come on, even the ribbons that wrap around her arms almost look like surgical bandages and instantly recall the bride's unmistakable style. Another subtle but meaningful detail is Elizabeth's red hair. While most later depictions show the bride with black hair streaked with white, the original wig worn by Lanchester in the 1935 film was actually red, which matched the actress's natural hair color. Put together, these details definitely made Elizabeth's bridal look a beautiful and thoughtful homage to one of horror's most enduring icons. The clever OG mad scientist reference. Now, this connection is a bit more abstract as it's thematic rather than visual, but bear with me. So, early in the Del Toro film, there's a scene where Victor's father quizzes him during an anatomy lesson about whether men's and women's hearts differ in weight. The elder Frankenstein, who is a man of wealth, privilege, and cold intellect, makes it clear that he valued logic and science above all else, and expected Victor to do the same, which makes him the head. The creature, on the other hand, symbolized the physical and the oppressed working class crushed under the power of the elite. Naturally, he is the hands. But standing between them is Elizabeth, who represented the heart with her empathy, compassion, and humanity. She bridged the gap between Victor's mind and the creature's body, as Elizabeth was able to understand and care for them both. But this dynamic does not quite appear in Mary Shelley's novel in this matter, but it strongly echoes Fritz Lang's Metropolis from 1927, where the moral is made explicit that the mediator between the head and the hands must be the heart. While Metropolis is not a Frankenstein story in the traditional sense, it's still a crucial part of the mythos surrounding the genre because it gave us one of cinema's first great mad scientists, along with one of the most unforgettable creation scenes ever filmed. In the movie, the son of a wealthy industrialist becomes the bridge between his powerful father and the exploited workers laboring deep beneath the city. The film's central message was made clear through its iconic title card. Even though it's not spelled out in Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein, the same idea lingers quietly beneath the surface, as you can just feel it in the performances and in the way characters relate to one another. Elizabeth's insect-themed clothes. As you know, Mia Goth plays Elizabeth Lavenza, the fiancée of Victor's brother, and she brings warmth and empathy to the story by becoming the creature's emotional anchor. Elizabeth stands out for her compassion and her deep fascination with the natural world, especially her love of studying and sketching insects. If you look closely, even her costumes reflect this part of her character, as the delicate patterns on her dresses and veils resemble the wings and bodies of insects, creating a subtle visual link between her and the natural life she cherishes. It's a beautiful contrast to Victor's own obsession with unnatural creation, where he tries to control life, but Elizabeth simply admires and nurtures it. At the sake of going deeper on the subject, her extensive wardrobe for Frankenstein came from the mind of Emmy Award-nominated costume designer Kate Hawley, who has worked on projects such as The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, and Crimson Peak. Because Elizabeth has an interest in entomology and botany, Hawley created nods to beetles and other insects through patterns and garment shapes. Along with wasp-waisted tight corsets, certain fabrics were also chosen to mimic paper-thin beetle wings. The design of the green dress that Elizabeth wore while leaving Victor's castle was inspired by butterflies and the patterns on butterfly wings. Apparently, this was something that Guillermo and Kate were exploring a lot with Elizabeth. In order to create unique insect-like patterns, Hawley studied both cellular structures and the anatomy of beetles because it was all about echoing those insect and beetle-like qualities before fitting the designs to the aesthetics of that period. Jewelry was also important in defining Mia Goth's character, with her iconic sapphire blue outfit featuring a Tiffany & Company signature piece from the early 1900s. The Louis Comfort Tiffany necklace is made up of actual blue glass beetle motifs in a gold setting, which echoes Elizabeth's character right from the moment she appears on screen. The mythological link with Victor's hidden pride. Del Toro's film does an excellent job of capturing Victor's pride and dangerous obsession as his most fatal flaw. This theme goes all the way back to the 1818 book's full title as Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus. For those who don't know, in Greek mythology, Prometheus defied the gods by stealing fire and giving it to humanity. Here, the fire is a symbol of knowledge and power, and going in line with that, we see another strong Prometheus reference during Harlander and Victor's first meeting, which really stuck with me, as Harlander asks Victor, "Can you contain your fire, Prometheus, or will you burn your hands before delivering it?" Apart from that, Del Toro weaves that same idea into Victor's world through striking visual details. In his laboratory, there's a massive relief of Medusa's head carved into the wall, which is yet another clever touch, because Medusa, being another figure from Greek mythology, represents both beauty and monstrosity, which is directly proportional to the theme of punishment and power in Victor's character. Moreover, by placing this image in Victor's lab, the film subtly suggests how he views himself as a mythic figure who dares to rival the gods. It's truly a haunting reflection of his arrogance and his reckless urge to bend the laws of nature to his will. Del Toro compares the birth of the creature to the resurrection of Christ. So in Del Toro's film, when Victor Frankenstein finally brings the creature to life, the moment is grand and intense, being exactly the kind of spectacle you'd expect from the director. We see the creature lying on a gurney, the kind used to move patients, but if you look closely, you'll notice that it was strapped to a metal frame shaped like a cross. Well, that was definitely a powerful visual choice loaded with religious meaning, because Victor here was not just creating life, but pretty much trying to take the place of God. The cross shape turns the creature into a kind of dark messiah, as he becomes a being that is born into suffering rather than salvation. It becomes a haunting reminder that Victor's pursuit of science has now crossed into the realm of blasphemy, which immediately transforms his quest for knowledge into something deeply sacrilegious and tragic. The creature's wounded flank is also a reference to the Christ's speared side in the Bible, which makes him an allegory for Christ, because Victor resurrects him on a cross right after saying that it is finished, which is in direct reference to Christ's crucifixion. Plus, if Victor represents God and the creature is an allegory for Christ, then Elizabeth symbolizes the purity of the church, which makes her the bride of the Christ. But it's also possible for Elizabeth to represent Mary, as she's the first person to find the creature after his resurrection, just like Mary was the first person to find Jesus after his resurrection. Not to mention the creature having a stigmata, or the wound of Christ, on his side. When Elizabeth confronts Victor, he doesn't even acknowledge the fact who hurt him. This mirrors Pontius Pilate piercing Jesus in the side with his spear of Longinus. Now, you might think my interpretation to be too religious, but Del Toro said in a pre-show for the film screening that his film features Christian iconography, all of which is fairly obvious upon viewing. Not to mention, Frankenstein has always had religious undertones, and this is definitely not a new development. Del Toro just expanded upon it. Furthermore, nearly all Gothic literature is religiously inspired, because it's a staple of the genre, having been fostered by the Victorians' fascination with death, spirituality, and the occult. The recurring tones of red in Victor. Victor wears red gloves throughout the film to symbolize the blood on his hands from first leading to Harlander's death and then trying to burn the creature to his death. But there are recurring tones of red throughout the film, and the strongest one comes from Victor's mother. So the red Victor wears in his scarf is also his connection to his mother, her empathy, and her humanity. His mother wore red when she first appeared in the film, and when she died. So, on a similar note, he wore a red scarf and gloves to evoke that mother-son connection. Ever since the death of his mother, Victor has been influenced by her, and her absence has marked every informed decision he makes. It is her death that motivates Victor to conquer the impossible and create life from death, which his father failed to do in his mother's case. Moreover, when he first sees the creature alive in his bedroom, we see that Victor is covered in his red blanket. Soon after, he starts tending to the creature like his son, and that's why one of the first things he introduces the creature to is the warmth of the sun, which really is bold wordplay on Del Toro's part. Even the creature tries to copy Victor in every frame in the beginning, just as a newborn mimics his parents. But as time goes, Victor becomes more like his father, and that's when we notice how the red has disappeared from his clothes. Victor's father was abusive to him, and after his mother's death, he was neglected while his brother became the apple of his father's eye. The same happens when the creature fails to meet Victor's twisted standards of perfection, thus driving him to become more like his father as he chains the being that he created and constantly beats him after the creature fails to comply. That's when we see the red disappear as Victor becomes the very man he hated while growing up by neglecting and abusing his creature in the very same manner. Not just that, we see the creator's costume gradually deteriorating as he loses control with time. In the beginning, Victor's clothes are crisp and structured because he had a sense of confidence in his burgeoning experiment, but as time flies, we see him with loose collars, cracking leather, sleeve hems fraying. Finally, at the end, Victor's own head becomes so disheveled that he ends up looking like his own experiment. So, as the creature becomes more human, Victor becomes more monstrous, and that's why he's covered in furs and hobbling by the end, meaning we pretty much see the devolving of Victor into the creature. The movie continues with the same streak of parental trauma seen in the book. Unlike the original source, Del Toro's Victor does not run away from his creature, but actually tries to be his father. But in doing so, he tries to control the creature. Now, in her book, Shelley sneaks in the idea that monsters are created by neglect, not birth. And you can see it clearly in the film when, after the death of Victor's mother, his father would only spend time with his brother and never him. Moreover, she clearly mentions that the creator is the biggest monster, not the creature. And that also happens in the film as Victor tries to kill the son he created when he becomes an inconvenience for him, and even blames the creature for the deaths he caused, thus not even trying to take accountability for his actions until it's too late in the end. This theme is further solidified when Victor reacts to the creature accidentally cutting his palm with a razor, and he tries to stop the bleeding. The sequence illustrates the generational trauma that's passed from father to son, and now to the creature. Victor's mother and lover are played by the same actress. You need to have a sharp eye to notice this, but Victor's mother is also played by Mia Goth, who stars as Elizabeth Lavenza. Now, in the book, Victor's mom dies of scarlet fever, but in Del Toro's adaptation, she dies while giving birth to his brother William, which basically signifies Victor's obsession with creating life and playing God. Del Toro makes the same person play his mother and his love interest, because both of these women are the deciding character for Victor, as they play a huge part in shaping Victor and the creature, while also sealing their fate. In fact, Victor saw them both as an emblem of purity, and that's why he fully lost it at the sight of Elizabeth loving the creature more than him. Maybe if the creature had not taken Elizabeth's name, Victor would not have tried to burn him alive, and maybe if Elizabeth did not embrace the creature on her wedding night, Victor would not have impulsively shot at him, killing Elizabeth in the process. Apart from that, Mia Goth's dual characters are also never shot in the same temperature of light, and even the colors in their frames are drastically different. We see Victor's mother as cold and sad, even if she's a nurturing character in his life, and Elizabeth is seen in an almost unreal light, and as Victor's love interest, we see her in warmer and more natural tones, like two different ghosts haunting the same man. Why is Victor always seen drinking milk in the film? So throughout the movie, Victor is seen drinking milk constantly, starting from the time his father was questioning him during studying to the time he first dines with Elizabeth and his brother inside Harlander's house. It again goes along with casting Mia Goth as both his mother and the woman he loves, because he has also got milk on the table when his mother goes into labor and dies. So he continues drinking milk to stay in touch with the innocence and safety he felt in his mother's embrace. The milk is definitely a reference to Victor's Oedipus complex or mommy issues, but there have been some rumors that it is a self-reference because Guillermo del Toro also drinks a lot of milk. Del Toro's Frankenstein is an ode to all classic illustrations. If you're a true Del Toro fan, you know that the director loves art and literature. In his film, the look of the creature is not like the famous square-headed movie monster. Instead, he looks closer to how Mary Shelley described the creature, to be tall, with pale translucent skin, and long dark hair. The film's visual style takes inspiration from famous illustrations. For instance, the lighting and shadowy scenes are similar to the wood engravings made by Lind Ward in 1934. The dark, detailed look of the creature also reminds many of the drawings by comic artist Bernie Wrightson from his 1983 illustrated edition of the book. These are ways the movie honors the novel's entire visual history. But that's not all. The film references Michelangelo's Touch of Adam twice. Once when the creature and Victor first meet, and then when Elizabeth and the creature first meet. Between both the shots, the characters go from grazing fingertips to clutching each other's hand. Then we see the recreation of The Incredulity of St. Thomas by Gerard von Honthorst, when Elizabeth touches the wound on the creature's wounded flank before asking who hurt him. Followed by this, when the creature escapes the tower and later wakes up surrounded by corpses in the woods, he picks up a human skull and looks at it with a strange sense of wonder. This scene is a nod to F. Wentworth's Hamlet and York's skull painting from 1867. There is also a scene recreating Simon Renard de Saint-André's Vanitas when Heinrich Harlander places a human skull among other ornamental trinkets on a table in the background in order to photograph a nude artist holding a peach. Caravaggio's Medusa painting also makes a striking resemblance in the gigantic wall carving of a shocked Medusa on Victor's tower, overlooking the palace where the creature is born. Honestly, you need to watch the film at least a couple of times on repeat to catch all these references, because what Del Toro made here is nothing short of art. I know for a fact that if I watch the film again, it will undoubtedly yield more hidden details, and perhaps you noticed the treasures I missed. In case I did, please point them out in the comment box below, and also give your thoughts on all these hidden motifs that Guillermo del Toro and company have created with Frankenstein. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one, and be safe. Thanks, everyone.